The Callaway was dead. Strike Commander Rethvor knew this the way all predators knew when life had left a body, not from instruments or data feeds, but from the silence. The human frigate hung in the void of the Tannhauser sector like a shed husk, its hull scorched black along the port side where something had bitten deep and torn the metal open. Atmosphere vented in frozen crystalline plumes from a dozen breaches. Emergency beacons pulsed their idiot rhythm into the dark, but the ship beneath them had stopped breathing. Rethvor stood at the observation port of the dread of silence and watched the wreck tumble in its slow, graceless rotation. His lateral line, the sensory ribbon that ran from his jaw to his hip along both flanks, read the vibrations of his own ship's hull as his soldiers assembled behind him. 40 warriors, 4 Talon strike configuration. He had led 62 boarding actions in his career and had never lost more than 2 soldiers on a single operation. This would not be the exception. His second, Caelthe, appeared at his shoulder and offered the sensor report. Minimal life signs, probably residual electrical activity in cooling bodies. Atmosphere at 14% and falling. Gravity plating functional in some sections, failed in others. Weapon systems offline. Engines dead. The Callaway was a Resolute-class frigate, a mid-sized vessel that the humans used for patrol and escort duty, and it had been gutted. Rethvor's talons stayed retracted. He didn't even feel them twitch. Prey was prey, and dead prey was simply a carcass to be stripped. He emitted a low-frequency command growl, the subsonic rumble that vibrated through the bones of every Vaelkir within range, and 40 soldiers responded with the harmonic acknowledgement that meant ready, eager, yours. He gave the order to board. They cycled through the airlock in standard formation, 4 soldier packs moving with the fluid precision that 30 generations of pack-hunting genetics demanded. Rethvor entered last. The Alpha always entered last on a boarding action, not from caution but from hierarchy. The pack clears the path. The Alpha walks it. The Callaway's interior was a cathedral of ruin. Emergency lighting cast everything in deep arterial red, and smoke hung in the corridors like fog over a swamp. The air tasted wrong to Rethvor, acrid with burnt polymer and something underneath it that his scent organs identified as human blood. Old blood. Hours old. The dying had happened before they arrived. His lateral line mapped the ship's anatomy through vibration, metal settling under thermal stress, the deep subsonic groan of a hull losing structural integrity by degrees, coolant dripping somewhere in a rhythmic patter. No footsteps. No heartbeats, nothing alive. Pack 1 cleared the bridge and found 6 human corpses strapped into their stations, killed by a combination of shrapnel and explosive decompression. Rethvor catalogued them as he passed through. Small, thin-skinned creatures with their single cardiovascular systems and their absurdly fragile skeletal structures. He had studied humans extensively and found them biologically contemptible. They compensated for their deficiencies with technology, and once you stripped that away, they were meat. He stepped over a dead officer without breaking stride. Packs 2 through 5 swept the upper decks methodically. More bodies. A medical bay where someone had tried to treat the wounded before the power failed. A mess hall where food still sat on tables, the meal interrupted by whatever had torn the ship apart. Rethvor noted the small details with professional detachment. A jacket draped over a chair, a personal tablet still displaying a half-written message, the scattered domestic evidence of lives that had ended mid-sentence. None of it interested him. He was looking for intelligence, navigational data, communication logs, anything the Dominion's analyst could use. Pack 3 descended to the lower engineering section and reported an anomaly. The report came through clipped and professional. A sealed hatch on sub-level 4 that the ship's schematics said should be open. Emergency lighting in the maintenance corridor that had been manually reconfigured. The red emergency lamps replaced with the white-blue service lights that would be useless to human eyes in their current low-power state, but would create a specific kind of glare for anyone seeing in. Infrared. And a blood trail leading from a collapsed support beam into a maintenance crawlspace barely wide enough for a human to squeeze through. Rethvor noted it with mild interest. A survivor, injured, given the blood, hiding, given the crawlspace. He ordered Pack 3 to flush the crawlspace and bring the human out alive if possible. Prisoners had intelligence value. 3 minutes passed. Pack 3's communication channel went silent. Rethvor hailed them. Static, He hailed again. Nothing. The silence had a texture to it. Heavy and absolute, like the moment between a predator's lunge and the prey's scream. He sent Pack 4 to investigate. They found the crawl space empty. They found Pack 3 one level below, in a maintenance junction that connected to the ship's exterior service hatches. 4 Vaelkir soldiers, all dead. The first had a wound through the gap between his neck plating and his helmet seal, a blade driven upward with precise knowledge of where the armor didn't cover, severing the primary artery. The other 3 had died from explosive decompression. Someone had opened the junction's exterior maintenance hatch, the one designed for EVA access during dockyard repairs, and vented the compartment to vacuum. Then, closed it again. The whole thing had taken less than 3 minutes. Rethvor's talons extended. The motion was involuntary, the deep brainstem response of a predator that has just caught the scent of something dangerous. His lateral line spiked, flooding his awareness with the ship's vibrations, and for the first time since they had boarded, every creak and settling plate registered as potential movement. 1 injured human, 1 knife, 4 dead Vaelkir warriors in under 3 minutes. He recalled his packs and reorganized. This was no longer a salvage operation. He redeployed his 36 remaining soldiers into 8-man formations, wider coverage, overlapping fields of fire. He accessed the Callaway's bridge computer and pulled the ship's full schematics onto his tactical display. The lower decks were a labyrinth. Maintenance tunnels branching into crawl spaces, branching into equipment bays, service corridors that ran parallel to the main passages, vertical shafts connecting decks through the engineering infrastructure, dozens of choke points, hundreds of hiding spots. He ordered the lights restored. The ship's systems were too badly damaged for full restoration. The result was worse than darkness, patches of harsh white light alternating with pools of absolute black, forcing his soldiers' tapetum-enhanced eyes to constantly adjust between extremes. Every transition from light to dark brought a half-second of blindness. He set a squad to the main power distribution node in engineering to restore full illumination. They reported back with a detail that made the scent glands along Rethvor's jaw clench shut. Someone had sabotaged the distribution node. Not damaged it, sabotaged it. Specific conduits had been disconnected, specific relays pulled. Precisely the ones that fed the lower deck lighting grid. The work was recent, done with tools taken from a maintenance locker that hung open nearby. The human was not hiding. The human was reshaping the battlefield. Something shifted in the architecture of Rethvor's understanding, a load-bearing wall giving way. In 62 boarding actions, he had encountered resistance, desperate resistance even, species that fought hard for their ships, their cargo, their lives. But resistance was reactive. It was the cornered animal lashing out. This was different. This was a mind that had looked at the wreckage of its own ship and seen not a grave, but an arsenal. Rithvor's reflective eyes dimmed, just slightly, just enough that the darkness at the edges of his vision deepened by a fraction. He knew what the dimming meant, his species' cruel evolutionary joke. Fear contracted the tapetum, reducing night vision at the exact moment a Vaelkir needed it most. He forced the thought away, forced his jaw muscles to unclench, forced the scent glands to relax. An alpha who smelled of fear was already dead. He would flush the lower deck systematically, drive the human upward, corner them. The ship had other ideas. Over the next 2 hours, the Callaway became a weapon. Hatches opened and closed on their own, driven by maintenance override codes that someone was inputting from the engineering sub-level access terminals. The sounds drew patrols into dead-end corridors where the doors sealed behind them, trapping them in compartments with no exit until they cut their way free, wasting time and announcing their positions with the shriek of plasma cutters. Fire suppression systems activated in occupied corridors without warning. The chemical foam was designed to starve electrical fires of oxygen, and it was harmless to tissue, but it coated every surface in a thick white paste that blinded infrared vision for 7, 8, 9 agonizing minutes. Soldiers stumbled through foam-filled passages, unable to see heat signatures, unable to read their lateral lines through the dampening layer coating their skin. Atmosphere vented in sealed sections with a bang that echoed through the hull like a thunderclap, not enough to kill, just enough to force a choice: advance through near vacuum or take the long way around through corridors that funneled into the spaces the human had already prepared. The sidearm spoke 6 times in 2 hours. Each shot came from a different location, a different angle, a different deck. The Vaelkir were pack hunters. They triangulated threats by sound instinctively, collapsing on the source of a noise with coordinated speed. But the human fired once and was gone before the echo resolved, moving through the maintenance network like blood through veins, never in the same place twice. 6 more soldiers died, 2 from the sidearm, clean shots through armor gaps that should have been impossible to target in near darkness, 1 from a ruptured steam line that had been rigged to blow when a door opened. The pipe scored nearly through and angled, so the superheated jet hit exactly where a Vaelkir's head would be at standard walking height. 1 from a gravity plate malfunction that reversed polarity when he stepped on it, slamming him into the ceiling at 4 times standard gravity with a sound like a wet sack hitting stone. 2 more died in a corridor on sublevel 3. Rethvor reviewed the sensor logs afterward and reconstructed it. Hydraulic fluid spread across the floor in a thin, nearly invisible film. The first soldier's feet went out from under him. As he fell, something dropped from the ceiling, from the open maintenance hatch directly above. The second soldier died before the first finished sliding. Knifework, fast and precise, targeting the same neck-plating gap. Then the human was gone, up through the hatch. The sound of the cover sliding back into place barely audible over the first soldier's alarmed shriek as he scrambled in the hydraulic fluid and found his packmate dead beside him. Rethvor's lateral line was screaming, not the sharp spike of a detected threat, but a constant, maddening wash of input, every vibration in the ship registering as potential danger. The drip of coolant sounded like footsteps. The settling of hull plates sounded like hatches opening. His biology, the Predator's toolkit that had made his species the terror of 11 conquered worlds, had become a liability. He was drowning in his own senses. He pulled his surviving soldiers back to the mid-decks and took stock. 30 soldiers remained from 40, 10 dead in 4 hours. Against 1 human with a knife and a pistol, he tried to frame it as a tactical problem, the kind of puzzle he had solved dozens of times. Asymmetric engagement in a confined environment. The solution was textbook. Flood the space with bodies, deny the enemy freedom of movement, compress the operational zone until they had nowhere left to run. But the textbook assumed the enemy wanted to run. This one didn't. In the hours that followed, 10 more soldiers died. The kills came in 1s and 2s, spaced just far enough apart that each new death arrived after the survivors had almost convinced themselves the last had been the end of it. A patrol found a corridor where the gravity plates had been set to alternate, one standard, the next reversed, creating a nauseating stutter that disoriented the lead soldier long enough for a shape to emerge from a wall panel and open his throat. A sentry posted at a junction heard breathing from the vent above him, looked up, and died, looking up. 2 soldiers sent to secure a water reclamation bay found the door locked behind them and the room slowly filling with the ship's recycled coolant. And by the time they cut through the door, they were hypothermic, shaking, useless, easy targets in the corridor beyond. The worst was the silence between. Minutes stretched into eternities of waiting for the next attack that might come from any direction, any surface, any shadow. Rethvor watched his soldiers' instincts turn against them. The lateral line that made Vaelkir such devastating predators processed every sound as a potential kill approach, and the ship made thousands of sounds. Each creak required evaluation. Each drip demanded attention. It was exhausting in a way that physical combat never was. The relentless cognitive load of being prey in an environment designed by your predator. The pistol ran dry in hour 4. Rethvor didn't know this immediately. He learned it from the shot's target. The human had been saving a round, and she spent it on a shot through a ventilation grating into the temporary command post Rethvor had established in a cleared storage bay. The round didn't hit a soldier. It hit the portable communications array he had set up to coordinate his squads. The array detonated in a shower of sparks and molten component, and just like that, his packs went deaf. No long-range coordination, no tactical updates. Each group of soldiers was now an island, connected to the others only by physical contact, runner communication through corridors full of darkness, and a human who killed without sound. In a ship where isolation meant death, the human had made every soldier alone. Somewhere in the maintenance tunnels beneath him, Rethvor imagined the human dropping the empty sidearm, He imagined the sound it made hitting the deck. He imagined the human looking at the knife and shrugging. The peculiar human gesture he had seen in captured footage, that strange upward motion of the shoulders that seemed to mean everything and nothing. He was not wrong. Cole dropped the empty M series and let it clatter. The sound wouldn't matter. By the time anyone triangulated it, she'd be 3 junctions away. Her leg was a cathedral of pain, the improvised splint holding the tibia roughly aligned, but every movement sent a white-hot wire of agony from ankle to hip. She'd stopped feeling her toes an hour ago, which was either the electrical tape cutting circulation or nerve damage. Didn't matter. The leg worked well enough to move on, and moving was all that mattered. She stripped the nearest dead Vaelkir with quick, professional efficiency, the way she'd field-stripped equipment for 26 years. The alien's plasma sidearm was useless. Biometric lock on the trigger keyed to a hand structure her fingers couldn't replicate. She took the armor plating instead, working the chest piece free and strapping sections over her injured leg with lengths of cable she'd pulled from a wall panel. Additional splinting and a little extra protection. She took forearm pieces too, lashing them over her sleeves as improvised guards. She took his ration pack. She ate crouched in a maintenance duct, her back against a warm conduit, leg elevated on a cable run. The ration pack contained something with the texture of compressed sawdust and a flavor she could only describe as burnt electrical insulation. She chewed methodically, staring into the darkness with eyes that had long since adjusted to the red-black of the emergency lighting. "Tastes like burnt rubber," she said to no one. 3 stars. She had started naming them. Not all of them, just the ones she tracked. Tallboy was the one with the scarred faceplate who led the 8-man squad on sub-level 2. Scratcher was the nervous one whose talons kept extending and retracting. Crick-click, the sound carrying through the ductwork like a metronome. The loud one had been the sentry who couldn't stop emitting that low-frequency whine, the one she'd killed in the junction 20 minutes ago. She named them because it was harder to kill something with a name, and she refused to make this easy on herself. If she was going to take lives in the dark, she was going to carry the weight of knowing they were lives. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this with clinical detachment, the way she'd notice a malfunctioning component during a maintenance check. Adrenaline fatigue. Her body had been running hot for hours, and the chemical well was running dry. She made a fist, held it, released it. The shaking didn't stop, but it became manageable. Good enough. She took a breath, then another. She checked the stolen talon blade she'd pulled from the first Vaelkir she'd killed, tested the edge against her thumb, felt the wicked sharpness of it. Alien steel, harder and lighter than anything human-made. She tucked it into the sheath she'd improvised from a cargo strap. "All right," she whispered. "Back to work." She got moving. In the mid-decks above her, the Vaelkir were falling apart. Rethvor could feel it in the subsonic register, the frequency below hearing where his species communicated pack status and emotional state. The dominant growls that should have anchored his soldiers' confidence were weakening, replaced by the tight, high-frequency whine of submission fear. Worse, he could hear alarm shrieks, involuntary bursts of ultrasonic panic that in the wilderness of their homeworld would summon the full pack to a threatened member. Here they did nothing but reveal position. 22 dead. More than half. The remaining 18 had stopped functioning as packs and become what Rethvor had never seen Vaelkir soldiers become. A crowd. They clustered, flinching at sounds, their talons extending and retracting in arrhythmic stress patterns. They looked at Rethvor, and what he saw in their reflective eyes was not the steady glow of trust in an alpha. Their tapetum was dimming too. A young warrior named Silketh stepped forward and suggested they retreat to the airlock. His voice carried the harmonic of near mutiny, the careful, measured tone of a subordinate testing dominance. Rethvor's talons punched out to full extension, the 4 curved blades locking into combat position with an audible snap. The display was automatic, primal, the alpha's answer to any challenge. Silketh's talons retracted in submission, but slowly, a fraction of a second too slow. The pack was fracturing. Rethvor ordered a consolidated retreat to the upper decks. Abandon the lower sections, fall back to the airlock, regroup. Call the dread of silence for extraction. He was conceding the field to a single human with a broken leg and a knife, and every instinct in his predator brain rebelled against the admission. But his soldiers were dying and he could not stop it. They moved in a tight column through the main corridor, 18 soldiers surrounding their alpha, weapons up, eyes scanning, lateral lines straining against the ship's background noise for any vibration that didn't belong. The maintenance hatch opened without a sound. The soldier at the rear of the column, a veteran named Reth, was there and then was not. The hatch closed. 30 seconds passed before the column noticed the gap. When they turned back, the hatch was sealed and from behind it came a single, abbreviated alarm shriek that cut off wetly. The column broke into a run. Reth drove them forward, past the point of discipline, past the point of formation, herding his panicked soldiers toward the cargo bay like the prey animals they had become. They reached it gasping, their lateral lines overloaded, their talons locked in full extension, their eyes dim with fear. The cargo bay was large, open, 100 meters by 60, with clear sight lines in every direction. The airlock was 50 meters away, visible across the empty expanse of deck plating. Reth positioned his 14 remaining soldiers in a defensive ring and opened a channel to the dread of silence. Extraction shuttle, immediate launch. His voice was steady. His hands were not. The shadows weighed 10 minutes out. Reth lateral line caught something beneath the relief of the open space, a vibration from below. Not random, not the ship's death rattle. Rhythmic, mechanical, something moving with purpose beneath the cargo bay floor. He looked down and understood too late. The cargo bay's loading system was designed for bulk transfer, entire floor sections that dropped open on hydraulic rams to move freight between decks. The system was controlled from the maintenance level directly below, and someone was down there, someone who knew exactly which panels to open. 3 sections of the floor dropped away. The defensive ring split into fragments, soldiers leaping back from the sudden chasms, formation dissolving into chaos. Through the ventilation system, coolant vapor began to pour into the bay, a freezing fog that dropped the temperature 20 degrees in seconds and filled the air with a dense white mist that scattered infrared into useless noise. In the fog, something moved. 3 more Vaelkir fell. Not to a knife this time. The blade that found them was curved, single-edged, with a weighted tip designed for the downward slash of a predator's killing stroke. A talon blade, their own weapon, taken from their own dead, wielded in their own darkness by something that moved through the fog like a rumor. Reth didn't see the kills. He heard them, the quick, dense sound of an edge meeting tissue, the truncated gasp of a soldier who didn't have time to shriek, the soft, wet sound of the body settling to the deck, then silence, and the fog, and the sound of his own cardiovascular system hammering in triplicate against his ribs. They reached the airlock corridor in a stumbling, desperate retreat. 11 soldiers remained. The corridor was narrow, 20 meters long, well lit. Reth had shot out the emergency lighting overrides with his own sidearm, ensuring the lights couldn't be killed remotely. Good sightlines. Defensible choke point. The extraction shuttle was 8 minutes out, then 5, then 3. The lights went out, not the overrides. She had physically severed the power conduit feeding this section, cut it from inside the wall, from the crawl space that ran between the corridor's outer bulkhead and the hull. The darkness was total. Reth's tapetum flared, hunting for any photon to amplify, but fear was a fist around his optic nerves, and the reflective layer contracted against his will, dimming his night vision at the moment he needed it most. He could see shapes, movement, the suggestion of walls and floor, nothing more. His lateral lines screamed, movement, left side, fast, close. He swung. His talons raked empty air. A blade opened a gash across his forearm, deep enough that he felt the cold of the ship's atmosphere in the wound. He roared, the alpha dominance roar, the sound that froze prey and rallied pack, the sound that had ended 100 fights before they began. A voice came from the darkness. Hoarse, female, speaking accented to Galactic standard with the flat vowels and hard consonants of a human who had learned it as a second language. Cute, my turn. She went for the soldiers nearest the airlock first, cutting off the retreat. Reth heard the fighting the way a blind man hears a storm, through impacts and cries and the displacement of air. His lateral line fed him a nightmare of data, bodies hitting the floor, the sharp percussion of blade on armor, the scatter of talons on deck plating as soldiers tried to turn, to face, to fight back against something that was already past them. Alarm shrieks overlapped into a wall of ultrasonic noise that made his skull ache and his vision blur. The sound was supposed to summon help. There was no help left to summon. The wet percussion of the talon blade. A grunt, human, pained, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting a wall, and then immediately the sound of movement continuing. She had been thrown or struck or staggered, and she had absorbed it and kept killing. A soldier near Rethvor fired his plasma sidearm into the darkness. The muzzle flash lit the corridor in a strobe of blue-white light, and in that frozen instant, Rethvor saw her. Small, blood-soaked, moving with the mechanical efficiency of a body that was operating on something deeper than strength. The light died. The soldier who had fired made a sound that was not a word in any language. Then it was quiet. Human breathing filled the corridor, labored, wet. Each exhale carried a faint whistle that suggested fluid in the lungs, but steady, rhythmic, the breathing of someone who was hurt badly and was still standing because the alternative was not standing, and that was not acceptable. Rethvor extended his talons, full combat spread, all 4 limbs, 16 blades locked into killing position. His lateral line mapped her location from the sound of her breathing. 3 meters to his left, standing, waiting, he charged. He was faster, stronger. He outweighed her by 40 kilograms and had 4 sets of natural weapons to her 1 stolen blade. His lunge covered the distance in a fraction of a second. Talons leading, aimed at center mass. The Predator's strike perfected over millennia of evolution. The killing move that had ended 10,000 hunts across 11 conquered worlds. She wasn't there. She hadn't dodged. She had dropped, straight down, under his lunge, letting her ruined leg buckle in a way that must have been exquisite agony. He heard the sound she made, a short, bitten-off grunt that she swallowed before it became a scream. His talons closed on air above her head, and his momentum carried him forward into the space where she had been standing. From below him, the talon blade came up in a short, precise arc. She had studied them. 6 hours of killing had taught her their anatomy the way a surgeon learns the body, through practice. The blade found the gap in his chest plating, the seam between the 3rd and 4th lateral plates that she had identified on her very first kill and memorized with the meticulous attention of a woman who knew that knowledge was the only weapon she could never run out of. The blade sank in, not deep enough to kill, deep enough that his lungs seized and his talons retracted and his legs took him backward in a stagger that ended with his shoulders against the corridor wall. He slid down the wall and sat. The blade was lodged between his 3rd and 4th ribs, and breathing had become a negotiation between his body and the steel. 3 meters away, Cole was on the floor. Her leg had given out completely, and she sat propped against the opposite wall, her back against the metal, the Ka-bar in her right hand, and the talon blade now in Rethvor's chest. Blood soaked her left side from the talon strikes he had landed across her ribs. Her breathing was worse than his. They sat in the dark and bled. The extraction shuttle docked. The airlock cycled. Light flooded the corridor in a white blast that made Rethvor's contracted tapetum flare with pain, and he saw her, not through infrared, not through lateral line data, not through the tactical filter of a predator assessing prey. He saw a human woman in her middle years, her face drawn with exhaustion and blood loss, her left leg bound in a grotesque scaffolding of conduit pipe, electrical tape, and stripped Vaelkir armor. She was small. She was broken in ways that should have stopped her hours ago. She was sitting in a corridor full of Vaelkir dead, and she was still holding the knife up, still ready, still fighting. Rethvor's talons retracted, not the slow, reluctant retraction of a predator choosing restraint, something else. Something his species had no word for because they had never needed one. It was the recognition that this was not a creature to dominate or submit to. It was something outside the hierarchy entirely. 3 soldiers emerged from the shuttle behind him, all that remained of his boarding party. They saw the corridor. They saw the bodies, pale gray and dark red intermingled. They saw the human. One raised his weapon and took aim. Rethvor's arm came up and blocked the barrel. The Alpha command. Absolute. Unchallengeable. He spoke one word in Vaelkir, the word that meant we leave. It was not a retreat call. It was not a concession of territory. It was the word a Vaelkir used when they had wandered into a place that did not belong to them and never had. They left. The dread of silence withdrew from the Tannhauser sector at maximum speed. The Callaway drifted in silence, its emergency beacons still pulsing their idiot rhythm into the void. A human patrol recovered the vessel 6 hours later. They found Sergeant Mara Cole unconscious in the airlock corridor, her knife in her hand, surrounded by the dead. Her pulse was thready, her blood volume dangerously low, her left tibia fractured in 3 places that had never been properly set. She was alive because she had refused, with the particular stubbornness that humans called grit, and the galaxy would learn to call something else entirely, to be anything other than alive. She spent 4 months in a military hospital. She received the Medal of Honor. She did not attend the ceremony. She was in physical therapy that day, learning to walk again on the leg that the doctors had rebuilt with titanium and carbon fiber in the quiet, professional anger of surgeons who understood what had been endured. When a reporter asked her what she had been thinking during the 6 hours aboard the Callaway, she considered the question for a long time and then said, "I was thinking about the next 10 seconds. That's all. Just the next 10 seconds, over and over, for 6 hours." Rethfor filed his after-action report. It was classified immediately. The first classified combat report in Vaelkir Dominion history. His superiors demanded an explanation for how 40 elite soldiers had been killed by a single injured human. His report was 3 sentences. The human was injured, alone, and trapped in a vessel with no functional weapons or escape routes. She had every reason to hide and wait for death. She chose to hunt instead. Attached was a single recommendation, stamped with his personal alpha seal: reclassify humans from prey-tier species to apex predator, effective immediately. Do not engage unless total force superiority exceeds 50-1. Even then, verify the human is actually dead before approaching. In his personal log, in an entry he never shared with Dominion Command, Rethfor added a final note. He wrote it in the dark of his quarters, his chest wounds stitched and sealing, his lateral lines still flinching at every vibration in the bulkhead. She let me live. I have spent 40 cycles trying to understand why. I believe it is because she had already proven her point. This terrifies me more than the alternative. He turned off the light, in the darkness. For the first time in his life, he could not sleep.